In the cold, iron-ribbed halls of Alpha King Tristan's palace, a sound more jagged than a blade echoes through the stone. The piercing screams of two infant princes. The raw, relentless cries of Veto and Theon are a jagged reminder of the queen who vanished, Nezarin, the woman they say fled into the night, leaving the king's heart shattered and his heirs inconsolable. Now, the future of the kingdom hangs by a fraying thread. The princes reject every elite nursemaid. They scream at the touch of every highborn healer, until the palace is forced to look toward the kitchens toward Josie. With her striking silver-white hair and haunting violet eyes, Josie is a wolfless anomaly, an orphan servant girl mocked for lacking the predatory spirit every shifter is born with. She was never meant to breathe the air of the royal wing, let alone touch royal blood. Yet, when desperation drives the royal guard Bram to drag her to the nursery, something impossible happens. The screaming stops. In the sudden, terrifying silence that follows, the princes grow calm in the arms of the girl they were taught to reject. They cling to her scent, rejecting all others, forcing the court to confront a dangerous truth. What kind of forbidden bond is strong enough to tie the fate of two alpha princes to a lowly, wolfless maid? And how will the volatile King Tristan react when he realizes his sons have chosen a protector he considers subhuman? Young Josie stood elbow-deep in dishwater so thick with grease it looked like stagnant swamp water. The air in the scullery was heavy with the smell of old meat and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone drifting down from the upper floors, the unmistakable scent of King Tristan's mounting, electric temper. Chef Margrave wouldn't let her stop until he could see his own sneering reflection in the bottom of every copper pot. Around her, the kitchen hummed with the usual cruel chaos. Highborn house servants swept in, their fine livery shimmering even in the steam, carrying silver platters piled with the wasted remains of a royal feast. They heaved the heavy trays into Josie's sink without a word, treating her as nothing more than a part of the plumbing. Josie kept her head down, her silver-white hair tucked tightly into a fraying cap, hiding the violet eyes that always seemed to provoke the other servants' vitriol. To them, she was a defect, a shifter born without a wolf, a hollow vessel in a world of predators. But as the distant, jagged wails of the twin princes pierced through the stone floorboards from the nursery above, Josie began to hum. It was a low, vibrating melody that seemed to bypass her throat and resonate from her very bones. She didn't know where the song had come from. It was a fragment of a memory from a mother she had never known. The tune was haunting and rhythmic, carrying a frequency that felt like the pulse of the earth itself. As she scrubbed, the melody blossomed into a soft, wordless song. In the heat of the kitchen, the other servants barely noticed the sound, dismissively viewing it as the mindless twittering of a simple girl. They couldn't hear the primal undertones in her voice, the deep, maternal frequency of a mother wolf calling her cubs to the den. It was a song of safety, of ancient forests and starlit protection. For a moment, as the song drifted upward through the vents and stone cracks, the frantic, bone-chilling screams from the royal wing seemed to falter, caught in a brief, confused hesitation. Josie scrubbed harder, her violet eyes fixed on the murky water, unaware that her wolfless soul was currently broadcasting the only harmony capable of taming the kingdom's greatest storm. She was just a dishwasher trying to survive the night, yet her voice held a power that the king's strongest warriors could only dream of possessing. The screams above shifted from a distance roar to a rhythmic, agonizing pulse that seemed to vibrate the very copper pots Josie was scrubbing. In the 3 days since Queen Nezarin had vanished, no one in the palace had known a moment of peace. The servants were frazzled, their eyes bloodshot, but none looked as haunted as the royal guard standing in the kitchen doorway. Bram was a man built of granite and scars, yet as he watched Josie, his hand trembled against the hilt of his sword. He had been standing there for 10 minutes, listening to the girl with the silver-white hair. He wasn't listening to her status or her lack of a wolf. He was listening to the strange, ancient frequency of her humming. To his shifter ears, the sound was like a cool salve on a burn. "You," Bram rasped, his voice cracking from exhaustion. Josie froze, her violet eyes wide with fear as she pulled her dripping hands from the greasy water. She expected a reprimand or a shove, but the guard moved toward her with a desperate, frantic energy. "The king has forbidden any lowbloods from the family wing," Bram whispered, leaning in so close she could smell the iron and sweat on his armor. "He's ordered the healers to sedate the princes, but their hearts are too small. They won't survive another night of this. They are dying of grief, Josie." I am just a dishwasher, sir," she stammered, clutching her damp apron. "The highborn nurses have failed. The healers have failed. But your voice." Bram grabbed her arm, not with cruelty, but with the grip of a drowning man. "If I am caught, it is my head. If you are caught, it is yours. But those children are the future of this pack, and they are fading." Before she could protest, he was pulling her through the servant tunnels, bypassing the main staircases where the Alpha King's inner circle patrolled. The air grew colder and more refined as they ascended, transitioning from the smell of roasted meat to the scent of expensive incense and underlying ozone, the king's lingering, volatile aura. They reached the heavy oak doors of the nursery, where the screams were so loud they felt like physical blows. The guards at the door looked ready to collapse, their wolf senses overwhelmed by the distress of the Alpha's heirs. Bram didn't give them a choice, using his authority to shoulder past. "Stay behind me," he hissed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "And, for the sake of the moon, don't stop that song." As the doors swung open, the chaos of the nursery hit them. Handmaidens were weeping in the corners, and the room was a wreckage of overturned cradles and silk blankets. In the center of the room, two tiny, flailing infants were turning blue from the sheer exertion of their sorrow. Josie took one look at their small, reaching hands and felt a pull in her chest so violent it eclipsed her fear of the king. She stepped out from Bram's shadow, her silver hair catching the candlelight, and walked toward the storm. The transition from the threshold to the center of the nursery felt like walking into a physical gale. The handmaidens scattered like dry leaves as Josie approached, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and resentment. They saw only a wolfless girl in a stained apron, her silver-white hair escaping its cap in frantic wisps. But Josie saw only the two tiny lives at the center of the storm. Veto and Theon were tangled in silk sheets that had become a nest of misery. Their faces were a frightening shade of plum, their lungs hitching in that terrible, silent secondary stage of a tantrum where breath becomes a luxury. Without waiting for permission, Josie reached into the gilded crib. The moment her skin touched theirs, a jolt like static electricity snapped through the air. The humming that had been a low vibration in her chest surged into a soft, melodic trill. It was the sound of the deep forest, of moonlight on still water. Slowly, she gathered both infants against her thin chest. The silence didn't fall all at once. It rolled out in a staggering wave. First, Vito's jagged gasp smoothed into a shuddering breath. Then, Theon's flailing fists uncurled, his tiny fingers latching onto the coarse fabric of Josie's tunic. The high-pitched wails died into small, wet whimpers, and then, finally, into a silence so profound it felt heavy. "By the mother," someone whispered, the sound carrying clearly now that the din had vanished. Bram stood frozen by the door, his hand still on his sword, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. That terror was justified a heartbeat later, when the heavy double doors at the far end of the wing groaned open. The temperature in the room plummeted. Alpha King Tristan entered like a predatory shadow. He was a towering figure of golden hair and lethal grace, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his aura was a jagged mess of grief and fury. He stopped dead, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the nursery, the smell of lavender, milk, and the unmistakable, thin scent of a wolfless human. His gaze dropped to Josie. His lip curled in an instinctive sneer of disgust at the sight of a scullery maid holding the future of his bloodline. He looked as though he might strike her, his hands clenching into claws at his sides. "Who allowed this vermin into the presence of my sons?" Tristan's voice was a low, guttural growl that made the other servants drop to their knees. Bram stepped forward, bowing low. "My king, they were fading. She is the only one who could quiet them." Tristan looked at his sons. They were fast asleep, their heads tucked into the crook of Josie's neck, as if she were the only safe harbor in a world of monsters. The king's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. The humiliation of needing someone so lesser was written in every line of his body. "Take her to the servants' quarters in this wing," Tristan commanded, his voice cold enough to frost the windows. He turned his back on her, refusing to let his eyes linger even a second longer on her violet gaze. "Keep her out of my sight. If they cry again, it is your head, girl. But do not think this makes you anything more than the dirt beneath their paws." The seasons bled into one another, but within the gilded cage of the royal wing, time was measured only by the growth of the two boys who had become Josie's entire world. A year had passed since the scullery maid had been plucked from the grease and steam, and in that time, Veto and Theon had flourished under her quiet devotion. They were no longer the fragile infants who screamed until they turned blue. They were toddlers with golden curls and a mischievous spark in their eyes that only Josie truly understood. Because they had been rejected by their mother and ignored by their father, the twins had developed a secret language with Josie, a complex system of soft chirps, hand signals, and the same low-frequency humming that had first saved them. They didn't need words to tell her they were hungry or tired. A specific tilt of Vito's head or the way Theon gripped her silver hair told her everything. She was their sun, their moon, and their North Star, providing the warmth the cold stone palace lacked. To the rest of the court, she remained a wolfless ghost, but to the future alphas, she was the only one who truly existed. However, the silence she had brought to the nursery had not brought peace to her own soul. Josie felt eyes on her constantly, eyes that didn't belong to the nurses or the guards. King Tristan had become a frequent shadow in the periphery of her life. He never spoke to her, and he never entered the room while she was awake, yet she would often catch the scent of ozone and expensive leather lingering in the doorway long after the sun had set. From the corners of darkened hallways or the height of the mezzanine, he watched her. His presence was a heavy, suffocating weight. His gaze was a battlefield. When he looked at her, his lips would pull back in a sneer of pure-blood supremacy, his hatred for her hollow, nature as sharp as a blade. He loathed that his bloodline was being raised by a girl he considered vermin. Yet, beneath that visceral disgust, a darker, more twisted curiosity had taken root. He watched the way her silver hair caught the moonlight as she rocked his sons, and the way her violet eyes held a depth of ancient power he couldn't quantify. It was a predatory fascination, the way a wolf watches a bird it cannot decide whether to crush or to cage. He hated her for being necessary, but even more, he hated the way his own pulse quickened whenever the Wolfless Maid walked past him, a silent, beautiful enigma in his own house. The winter wind rattled the high windows of the royal wing, sounding like the ghostly scratching of claws against the glass. Inside the nursery, the hearth fire had burned down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor where Josie sat, the twins finally asleep in their shared crib. She didn't hear the door creak open, but she caught the scent of yeast and wood smoke. Paula. The elder cook didn't stay by the door, as she usually did. Tonight, she moved with a heavy, purposeful tread, her face etched with a gravity that made Josie's heart stutter. Paula sat on the edge of a velvet chair, her eyes tracing the silver-white hair that spilled over Josie's shoulders. "You love them too much, child," Paula whispered, her voice like grinding stones. "You love them as if they are yours, but you forget whose blood runs in their veins. Tristan's shadow is growing longer every day." Josie tightened her grip on the edge of the crib. "He is their father, Paula. No matter how much he hates me, he wouldn't. He is a king who views his sons as weapons, not children," Paula interrupted, leaning forward until the firelight caught the fierce glint in her eyes. "They say Queen Nezerin fled with a lover. They say she was a traitor who couldn't bear the weight of the crown. It is a lie, Josie. A lie Tristan fed to the pack to hide the rot in his own heart." Josie felt the air leave her lungs. The palace gossip had always portrayed the queen as a villain, a mother who had abandoned her own flesh for a whim. "She fled because she saw what Tristan was becoming," Paula continued, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration. "He didn't just want mates, he wanted subjects. He wanted to break her spirit until there was nothing left but a wolf to breed his heirs. She didn't leave her sons because she didn't love them. She left to build a sanctuary where they could be free from him. She is in the north, Josie. She is raising an army of those the king has cast aside. The broken, the wolfless, the rebels." Paula reached out, her rough hand covering Josie's small, pale one. "She hasn't forgotten them. Every month, a messenger finds me in the market. She asks if they're healthy. She asks if they are safe. And lately, She has been asking about the girl with the violet eyes who stands between her sons and the king's darkness. Josie looked at the twins, her chest aching. The secret bond she shared with them suddenly felt like a bridge to a woman she had never met. She is waiting, Josie, Paula murmured, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air like a bared blade. The war isn't coming for the kingdom. It's coming for them. And when the time comes, you'll have to decide if you are a servant of the palace or a sister of the north. The stillness of the nursery was absolute, a fragile peace bought with the exhaustion of 2 toddlers and their devoted keeper. Josie had fallen asleep in the oversized chair nestled between the twin mahogany beds, her head resting near Theon's small, rhythmic chest. One hand remained draped protectively over Vito's shoulder, a bridge of warmth that kept their nightmares at bay. Her silver hair had come undone, spilling across the fine silk linens like moonlight reflected on water. The crash of the double doors was not a sound, but a vibration, a shockwave of pure, unadulterated ozone that set the air on fire. Josie bolted upright, her violet eyes wide and hazy with sleep, as the towering silhouette of King Tristan filled the archway. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a storm given human form. His aura was jagged, a predatory pressure that forced the breath from her lungs. He was across the room in 3 strides, his movement a blur of lethal grace. He didn't look at his sons. His burning gaze was fixed on the sight of a lowborn girl daring to stain the royal sheets with her presence. He reached down, his fingers like iron claws, and hauled Josie to her feet by the collar of her tunic. "How dare you?" he hissed, the sound a guttural vibration that made the glass in the windows tremble. "How dare you lay your filth where Alpha sleep?" As he wrenched her backward, her tunic shifted, pulling tight against the pale skin of her throat. The flickering firelight hit the base of her neck, illuminating the mark of the Wolfless, a faint, star-shaped birthmark that shifter law dictated as the sign of an empty soul. Tristan's eyes went feral. The sight of it seemed to snap the last thread of his restraint. He didn't see a girl who had saved his children. He saw a parasite, a hollow creature who had infiltrated the very heart of his legacy. "You've bewitched them," he roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying, manic edge. He shook her, her feet barely touching the floor. "I wondered how a nothing like you silenced them when my own blood could not. It was never a song, was it? It was a sickness. A wolfless rot you've poured into their minds to make them crave you." Josie tried to speak, but his grip was a vice. The twins woke with a start, their wails beginning to rise, but Tristan was beyond hearing them. He was blinded by the toxic combination of his own inadequacy and his deep-seated prejudice. "You have poisoned the future of the North," he snarled, his face inches from hers, his breath smelling of dark wine and ancient fury. "You have woven your common threads into the gold of my crown. I will peel the skin from your back myself to find the source of this magic before I hang you for the treason of your very existence." The stone of the deep dungeons was not merely cold, it was parasitic, leaching the warmth from Josie's bones until her breath came in ragged, white plumes. There was no straw, no light, only the oppressive weight of the palace pressing down on her from above. The iron bars of the cell felt like a physical manifestation of King Tristan's hatred, unyielding, cold, and absolute. Outside the heavy gate, the rhythmic clink of armor announced the presence of her jailer. Bram stood in the torchlight, his face a mask of stone, but his hands were clenched so tightly around his spear that the leather grip creaked. He had been ordered to watch the traitor, to ensure the wolfless girl who had poisoned the royal bloodline did not escape the moon's justice. But as the hour grew late, a sound began to filter down through the ventilation shafts of the dungeon, a sound that made Bram's wolf howl in silent agony. The twins were screaming again. It wasn't the fussy cry of a child missed or a toddler tired. It was a primal, gut-wrenching shriek of abandonment. The wails echoed through the stone corridors, bouncing off the damp walls until the entire basement level seemed to vibrate with their misery. Upstairs, the king was likely pacing his solar, his pride refusing to admit that the vermin he had discarded was the only thing holding his family together. "They won't stop, Josie," Bram whispered, his voice cracking as he finally turned to look at her. He saw her huddled in the corner, her silver hair matted with dirt, her violet eyes dull with the realization of her impending death. The healers tried to give them poppy milk. Veto bit them. "Theon has cried until he's coughing blood." Josie pressed her forehead against the freezing iron bars. "Let me go to them, Bram. Just for an hour. I don't care what he does to me afterward, but they are so small. They don't understand." Bram looked away, his jaw working. He was a soldier of the crown, sworn to the Alpha King, but the sounds from above were the sounds of a pack in collapse. Every time a fresh wave of screams reached the cell, he flinched as if struck. The guilt was a physical rot in his gut. He had been the one to bring her to the nursery. He had seen the way she loved them, and he knew, with the instinct of a true guardian, that there was no witchcraft here. Only the pure, selfless bond of a girl who had nothing else to give. "He'll hang me alongside you," Bram murmured, more to himself than to her. "He's going to hang me anyway," Josie replied, her voice a ghost of its former self. "But if you don't do something, he's going to break them, too." The screaming above grew sharper, a jagged edge of despair that tore through the silence of the dungeon. Bram reached for the heavy ring of keys at his belt, the metal cold against his palm, as the battle between his duty and his soul reached a violent, inevitable breaking point. The silence of the dungeon was shattered not by the guards, but by a sound that defied the laws of nature. High above, a heavy oak door splintered with the force of a battering ram, followed by the frantic, rapid-fire thumping of small feet against stone. The wails had stopped, replaced by a low, vibrating growl that seemed too deep, too ancient, to belong to children not yet 2 years old. Bram froze, his hand hovering over the lock of Josie's cell, as the scent of ozone and raw magic flooded the stairwell. A burst of blinding silver light erupted at the top of the passage, cascading down the damp walls like liquid moonlight. Then came the heat, a searing, golden warmth that pushed back the dungeon's parasitic chill. The twins didn't walk into the gloom. They hunted through it. Veto and Theon appeared at the base of the stairs, but they were no longer the soft, golden-curled toddlers Josie had tucked into bed. In the throes of their distress, their alpha blood had surged, forcing a premature transformation that should have been impossible for years. In a chaotic whirl of fur, bone, and light, the boys shifted. It was a violent, beautiful spectacle, a flash of silver fur and golden eyes. Where 2 infants had stood, 2 small, barrel-chested wolf pups now crouched, their fur the color of winter wheat and their eyes glowing with a terrifying, sentient intelligence. The guard stationed at the secondary gate stumbled back, his own wolf whimpering in his mind at the sheer dominance radiating from the tiny creatures. "Demons," he hissed, his voice cracking as he reached for his silver-tipped spear. But the pups were faster. With a synchronized snarl, they lunged. They didn't bite to kill. They moved with a tactical precision that mocked the guard's training. Theon nipped at the man's heels, forcing him to stumble, while Veto leapt with impossible height, his jaws snapping shut around the heavy leather belt where the master keys hung. With a sharp tug and a metallic snap, the ring of iron fell. Veto caught the keys midair, his landing silent and graceful. The guard scrambled away, terrified by the sight of the king's own blood turning feral to protect a wolfless maid. The pups ignored him, trotting toward Josie's bars with their tails held high. Veto dropped the keys at her feet, the iron clinking against the stone. He let out a soft, high-pitched woof, pressing his wet snout against the cold bars. Through the iron, Josie reached out, her fingers sinking into the thick, impossibly soft fur of the pup's neck. The mark of the wolfless on her throat glowed faintly in the presence of their shift, a silent acknowledgement that while she had no wolf of her own, the alphas of the north had claimed her as their pack. The heavy iron lock clicked open, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the damp dungeon. Josie stumbled out of the cell, her legs weak, but her resolve hardening the moment the 2 silver-furred pups pressed their warm, vibrating bodies against her shins. Veto and Theon looked up at her with glowing golden eyes, their small chests heaving with the exertion of their transformation. They weren't just toddlers anymore. They were the vanguard of her survival. Bram met them at the base of the servants' stairwell, his face grim and his blade already unsheathed. "The alarm has been raised," he hissed, the scent of burning torches and ozone-heavy magic beginning to seep down from the upper levels. "Tristan knows the pups have shifted. He's coming for his property, and he won't care who he has to cut through to reach you." As they raced through the labyrinthine servant tunnels, the sound of heavy boots and clashing steel thundered above them. They reached the hidden kitchen egress, the small, unassuming wooden door where Josie had once accepted deliveries of rotting meat, and burst out into the night. A wall of biting, sub-zero wind slammed into them, carrying the first heavy flakes of a northern blizzard. "Halt!" A voice roared from the battlements. A squad of the king's elite guards, led by a man whose wolf scent was sharp with malice, rounded the corner of the stone stable. They leveled their spears, their eyes widening at the sight of the royal pups snarling at the side of a wolfless maid. "Step aside, Bram," the lead guard commanded. "Hand over the heirs and the girl, and perhaps the king will let you live." Bram didn't hesitate. He stepped into the gap between Josie and the soldiers, his cloak billowing in the freezing gale. "I served the crown until the crown became a noose," he growled, his voice dropping into a guttural, wolf-like rasp. "Run, Josie. Do not look back." Steel clashed against steel, a shower of sparks illuminating the swirling snow. Bram moved with the desperation of a man seeking redemption, his sword a blur of lethal precision as he engaged 3 men at once. Josie scooped up the 2 pups, tucking their small, warm bodies into the folds of her threadbare cloak. She didn't have a wolf speed, but she had the adrenaline of a mother protecting her young. She plunged into the dark tree line of the surrounding forest, her boots sinking deep into the fresh powder. Behind her, the sounds of the struggle faded, replaced by the howling of the wind and the rhythmic breathing of the pups against her chest. To the north, a single, piercing howl cut through the storm, a call that didn't sound like a threat, but a beacon. Queen Nezerin was out there, somewhere in the frozen wastes, waiting with an army for the children the king had tried to break. Josie didn't know if they would survive the night, but as she vanished into the white abyss, she knew she was no longer a servant. She was the shield of the North, and the reckoning was only just beginning.